Hello guys, we are on the sixth game on the concept of initiative, and here the game is played between Ali Kane and Tekman in Berlin 1921, and the game goes e4, e5, it's a Ruy Lopez, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, then bishop a4, then knight f6, then castles, knight takes e4, and Tickman was one of the greatest fighters ever. He was never afraid of the era's elite. This game, full of shots and fine tactics, is a proof. And here d4, b5, bishop b3, d5, d takes e5, bishop e6, and this is a open Spanish. And after c3, bishop e7, and bishop e3, castle shot, and knight bd2. All this is a well known. Techman chooses a more active and forcing continuation. Now bishop g4, and here instead, if knight takes d2, then queen takes d2, then knight a5 is evidently solid for black, but Techman chooses bishop to g4, and now knight takes e4, d takes e4, now queen d5, and this queen d5 move is an improvement that Ali Kane had in his mind. It is unpleasant for black, but he should be okay with the precise play. Here, if instead bishop to d5, then knight takes e5, and bishop takes e4, and then knight takes f3 check, and bishop takes f3, queen takes d1, and bishop takes d1, leads to an equal endgame. If at all after bishop d5, if e takes f3, then bishop takes c6, then f takes g2, then queen takes g4, and g takes f1, and rook takes f1, and rook to b8, and now rook to d1, and queen to c8, now rook to d7, gives white more than enough compensation for the material. But Ali Kane goes queen d5. It is his preparation. Now after queen takes d5, there is bishop takes d5. Here later Kasparov suggested that instead of queen takes d5, he takes f3. Now queen takes c6, then f takes g2, then queen takes g2. White has a strong initiative on the king side. And then if at all after queen takes g2, then later Kasparov's evaluation was tested, and then after queen takes queen d7, then bishop to h6, After gh6, now f3, h5, rook a to d1, and then queen to f5. Now f takes g4, queen takes e5, rook d e1, queen to c5 check, and king h1. White's attack was unbearable, and here this game was played between Kasparov and Yusupov, and Kasparov won the game in style. Here, if instead of h5, if black played rook a to d8, then f takes g4, and queen to d2 with a slightly better position for white, and this was much better than the earlier variation. But in the game, Alekhine went queen d5, then queen takes d5, then bishop takes d5, then e takes f3, then bishop takes c6, then f takes g2, then king takes g2. Now you rook a to d8. After a series of exchanges, white should be better due to the better mobility of his pieces. Many pawns are exposed, that is the a6, b5 and e5. Inventive and active play is needed. Other players may fail to understand this, but not Alekhine. This is one of his most concrete games. Every move carries some kind of threat. Now Alekhine goes a4. He strikes first due to the ultimate activity of the c6 bishop. Black cannot activate the rooks properly, and white doesn't waste time by going for a direct attack. However, black's reaction is also classy. He plays f6. Here b4 would keep the a file closed, but the pawn structure would be ruined. After c takes b4, then bishop takes b4. Here after b4, c takes b4, bishop takes b4, then rook a to c1, and white is better here. So after black plays f6, now a takes b5. Here suddenly the white king will be in trouble if white captures on f6. That is, if at all white captured on f6, then rook takes f6, and then with the idea of rook g6 is unpleasant here. So here a takes b5, then a takes b5, bishop takes b5, f takes e5, then bishop c4 check, keeping the king far from the center and removing the bishop from the b file, rendering the move rook b8 to be useless. And now king h8, and now f3, and bishop h5, and rook to a5. White collected black's exposed pawns on the queen side, but lost the e5 pawn at the same time. All the weak pawns are gone. However, new ones have appeared. That is the c7, e5 and f3. With his last move, white attacked the e5 pawn and is ready to play bishop c5 at some point, securing that spot for the rook. But it is black's turn, and he immediately notes that white also has weaknesses, very typical of Tickman. The first unforced move must be an active one. Now he plays rook d1. Now bishop to d5. This is an exclamation mark, because if rook takes d1, then bishop takes f3 is the idea. And after king to g1, then after bishop takes d1, then rook takes e5, then bishop to d6 would not satisfy white. Alekhine definitely wanted more than a draw. Here even instead of rook takes d1, if white plays rook takes e5, then rook takes f1, king takes f1, bishop takes f3, and oh, I'm sorry, here bishop instead if rook takes takes. No, this is not the correct variation here. And rook to d1, here if rook takes e5, rook takes f1, king takes f1, then after bishop takes f3, no, after rook a5, rook d1, bishop d5. Here if rook takes f1, king takes f1, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, and king e2, and rook to f8 is a draw. So after bishop d5, here rook d1, bishop d5. Okay, rook takes f1, king takes f1, bishop takes f3, rook takes bishop takes f3, rook takes f3 check, king e2, rook f8, and king to d3. This is a miracle. What is the point is, the point is that the e5 pawn just blocks the black bishop, causing a mess in black's camp. The rest of the game confirms Alekhine's idea. White simply wants to place the king on e4, and after establishing control over the entire center, to advance his queenside pawns. It is important, by the way, that the white bishop is dark colored, so that the endgame with the bishop and h pawn is winning. Black cannot just sacrifice his bishop to eliminate white's queenside pawns. Here, if at all rook takes e5 is played, then bishop to d6, then rook h5, now g6, with centralization of the black king would give black an easy draw. So rook takes e5 was not played. Now king to d3, king g8. Here instead of king g8, e4 check was better. Although white benefits by capturing the pawn back while centralizing the king. After king takes e4, bishop d6, h3, white is better, but black is probably able to hold without much difficulty. But black played king g8, then king e4, now rook to b8. This is a bad move. Black cannot stop the white pawns by keeping the rook in front of them. White's centralized army easily supports the pawn majority. It was better to continue the king's centralization with king f7. Here now white plays b4, king f7, b5, king e6 and c4. Everything is going smoothly. Evidently black's counterplay on the king side is slow and black must take care of the queen side. Now king d7, rook to a7, bishop d6. This is the last mistake. The position is now lost. Here king d6 was much better and it was much more resistant defense. A draw should be expected. But black plays bishop d6, now king to d5. Here white could also win with b6 because of the pin. Now e4, now b6. Now the e4 pawn is not important. Now rook to f8, c5, rook f5 check, king c4, and black resigned here. White inevitably advances the pawn to the 7th rank with an easy win. One of the most beautiful games. It was truly fascinating, full of tactics in order to achieve strategical goals. You will not often see such a dynamic and beautiful game. Both the players deserve to be appreciated. So thank you all guys. I will be meeting you in the next game.